Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel. Today, we are finally ending the Tansmanian invasion breakdown with the final parts of the war and the resolution. Please stay tuned for announcements later on, because these announcements are going to be very important, and please stay tuned. Also, because just okay, basically, please stay tuned after this video because there are some announcements I am going to mention and also give highlights and brief mentions to future plans and stuff like that. So without further ado, let's get on to the video. Tansmanian army are doing good for their defense. Are doing good for their offensive on Kandahar, but they need to move troops to Mongolia and try to fight their enemies in the east. So the emperor ordered General Ishimo to send a unit of Tansmanian and Tamerlane troops to Mongolia, while he leaves the other half to attack Morlant. This plan to the Tansmanian army is called the Yuri Plan. If they succeed in conquering Mongolia, then they could have the armies fighting on multiple fronts, and they could defeat their enemies by forcing them to stretch their defenses. After a whole day of preparation, the two divisions began to conduct their assaults. While one division is on their way to confront their enemies in Kandahar, the second division had found the Kandaharian air base as they were marching for Mongolia. The attack, which they didn't and proved to be another victory for the Tansmanian army. The attack with the general leading the second division, General Ishu Baratiku, constructed an ambush on the base by sending his men in the tree line, and once they have their enemy in position, they would launch their attack, which they did and proved to be another victory for the Tansmanian army. In the aftermath of the battle, they had captured two Kandaharian officers and destroyed their planes, so that the Kandaharians won't have the air support to use on their friends marching their way towards the capital. One of the Kandaharian officers during the battle ordered 5 soldiers to be sent to Commander Pham, letting him know that their base was attacked, and there would be a chance that air support wouldn't be reliable. The soldiers arrived where Pham and his friends were stationed at, and told them the news. Pham and the others were upset about how the Tansmanians found their air base, but they need to come up with a defense strategy before their enemy arrives. So Pham, Zhu, and Paston constructed a plan. Their plan is to hold their position and try to buy time for the rest of the Kandaharian soldiers to retreat to the capital and prepare a final stand, and when they are down to a few men, they will regroup with the others in Kanoi and hold there until the end. Pham radioed other positions in Kandahar to regroup in Kanoi and prepare defenses while they still have time, and he also told them that they will remain to fight them to buy them time, and if things were to go where they're at to go terribly wrong, they would meet them in Kanoi and hold their ground there. The generals that heard the message immediately told their men to pack everything they had and bring it with them to Kanoi and make defenses in there instead of where they were originally stationed. As for the Tansmanians, the emperor decided to call in his ally Tanlin to help aid their invasion on Mongolia, along with the second division, which he would then order General Muratiku to occupy the airbase until his unit of Tansmanian soldiers meet his, and from there they could continue their march to Mongolia. Meanwhile, Pham and his friends know that their enemy would be marching their way towards the capital, and luckily the village of Mingquan is a good blockade for their enemy to come across. So his friends began to request more reinforcements to help Pham defend the village, and have some in reserve in Kanoi along with the remaining Kandaharian soldiers. Excuse me. Paston requesting reinforcements to aid his men in the village and help the remaining soldiers in Kandahar set up defense. Soldiers. Pham was hopeful that this plan could work, and he also hoped that his friends' reinforcing units could arrive on time. When the leader of Pasaja, King Harold, received the message from General Paston requesting reinforcements to aid his men in the village and help the remaining soldiers in Condas set up defenses in the capital. He agreed to send reinforcements, but he would only send a small unit because he needed the rest of the men to guard the colonies in Placica and Morlant. But he knows that a unit of men will be enough, so he made a phone call to the president of Australia, Jack Gresson, for some of the soldiers to come to Passaja to be sent to Condas to help Paston, which luckily Jack agreed, and he told Harold that his men would arrive in the evening. Within a couple of hours, the Australian soldiers have arrived and are now being sent with a unit of men to Condas to help Paston and his friends defend the village. On the afternoon of Saturday, February 3rd, 2024, the Tansmanian unit heading for Kanoi had reached the Allied defense in Minquan, and the battle had ensued. After a few minutes of gunfire and melee combat, the soldiers retreated due to the mass numbers of the Tansmanian soldiers and its missile-launching truck. This was a Tansmanian victory, but they had lost a lot of soldiers and their 2 tanks, which means they would have to rely on reinforcements and wait for them to arrive. The Allied soldiers, however, won the battlefield despite losing men, because due to their enemy losing a lot of men, they will have time to reach Kanoi before their reinforcements arrive, which was a sign of good faith. The other unit had met the Tansmanian soldiers at the base and have continued their march towards Angola. Meanwhile, Emperor Hirohito received a call from General Yudiko, who was leading the unit heading for Kanoi, asking for some reinforcements, but he can't provide a lot of his men because if he loses more men, he could lose. So he told Yudiko to wait until another unit has defeated the Angola. The other unit has defeated the Angola and have it under control. Their control, which Yudiko agreed, and even though he wished he had reinforcements. On Sunday, February 4th, February 4th at noon. On February 4th, 2024 at noon, General Mirotiko's forces have arrived near the Angolan border and have begun their assault, which lasted a few minutes, and it was declared in Tansmanian victory for entering Angola. Meanwhile, the leader of Angola sent a radio call to his neighboring ally, Morlant, saying that Tansmania has begun their invasion on his country. Excuse me. The leader Morlant, Jean Medong, heard the message and told his friend King Harold what happened. Harold saw that this was a huge problem and decided to send more soldiers to defend in the northern borders from the Tansmanians and Tanlands, while Morlant and Condas focused on their positions and holding them down. After a couple of days of the Tansmanians finally launched their attack on Kanoi, but after a few minutes of combat, it resulted with the Tansmanian unit losing a lot of men and having to fall back to regroup their forces. The Allies were glad that they won the battle, but they knew that it wouldn't be the last, so they prepared themselves again for the next attack. Meanwhile, Yudiko's forces are already marching their way into the Angola to reach the Morlantian border. The Angolans were ordered to try to weaken the Tansmanian unit as much as they can and make sure to lower their morale in order to force them to make a retreat out of the Angola. As Yudiko's forces were marching through the Yang jungle, they were suddenly ambushed by Angolan soldiers, which luckily only killed a few men on the Tansmanian side, and in return, they killed a few Angolans, and they know that the Angolans have a few men left, and would soon be a matter of time for them to surrender. The Angolan soldiers who went to the Morlantian border and reported that their attempt at stopping the enemy was ineffective, and that they were still on their way towards Milan, which meant that they could arrive at tomorrow afternoon or early dawn. On the morning of Thursday, February 8th, 2024, Yudiko's forces have arrived and immediately began their assault by using their vehicles to bombard the Allied defenses, and then, after the bombardment, they charged into the Allied forces, which was resulting with both sides taking losses. But the one who retreated were the Allied forces. This was another victory for Tansmania, and now it is a matter of time until they surrendered. It just takes one last battle, which would be held at Kanoi. The Allied forces who were defending the Merlanting border in the northeast retreated to the Merlanting Fort Augieu to report to the defeat of the border, which many were devastated, but they hoped that their friends in Connaught can repel the enemy attack there and force into Tansmania to surrender first. The emperor was pleased with Eudico's success and told him to stay where he was because Greenland threatened his nation that they would declare war if they entered Merlant any further. And he wanted them to hold their position. And he told Eudico as well that he wanted to send the remaining Tansmanian troops to General Muratiku's forces to reinforce his division to launch their second attempt on invading Connaught. During the afternoon, at 1:20 p.m. on Friday, February 9, 2024, Muratiku's forces had begun their second siege on the capital of Connaught, and they had managed to win this time by bombarding the capital a few times and sending in their troops to fight the remaining defenders. The Allied soldiers held for a good while, but they were defeated due to a lot of heavy casualties, and the remaining survivors were Commander Pham, General Jing, General Paston, Private John Wesley, General Falker, Fawker, Private Jack Grain, and 10 Merlantian soldiers. Now with the capital in the hands of the Tansmanians, the leader of Condas, Machi Hun, and the remaining 4 soldiers to protect him, surrendered to Muratiku and have them as prisoners of war, which they would be grouped with the other prisoners they captured. Then, a few minutes later, General Muratiku would send a radio broadcast to the Allies saying that Connaught has been captured and Condas is under their occupation, and it will be up for them to continue the war or surrender entirely, and peace arrangements would be granted. The nation of Merlant had suffered a heavy amount of casualties from spreading out their forces on multiple fronts, and Zhao had no choice but to accept his defeat and surrender to Tansmania. The country in Angola, being a new nation and having its first war, also suffered a lot of casualties, and the national leader, Genghis Khan, also had no choice but to surrender to keep his remaining allies' soldiers alive. With Angola and Merlant defeated, the only 2 nations that could continue the fight would be Basaja and Australia. But Basaja had lost a lot of men from the beginning, and the king still needed men to guard its colonies and then nation, so King Harold also decided to surrender because if he continued, he would lose his men and his colonies, and his nation would be vulnerable for other enemies. As for Australia, they could also have continued the war, but they lost a lot of men and have spent half of their economic salary paying and supplying their troops, which resulted with the Australian president to also surrender to Tansmania to keep its economic status. All the national leaders would arrive in the city of Connaught within a few hours to talk with General Muratiku and Emperor Hirohito to exchange prisoner releases and peace terms to settle their matters. The Allied leaders have arrived, and before prisoner exchange was discussed, the leader of Tansmania presented a new document which was titled the Imperial Territorial Reclamation Act of 2024. This document consists of terms made by Tansmania for the Allies to follow as peace terms and a way for Tansmania to reclaim its territories that was taken from them after the Second Green and Tan War. After Tansmania filled the document out, listing which nations they wanted to reoccupy, the Allied forces signed the document confirming their agreement, even though they hated it. But it was the only way to avoid economic death and genocide of countries. Now, with the document signed and filled, the prisoners that were captured from the war were released, and Tansmania began to occupy the nations that it claimed, which were Condas, Tanland, and Angola. This was the first time Tansmania had won a war, and they hoped to keep their territories this time. As for the nations that were forced to be occupied by Tansmania, Tansmania have to accept it until their time to revolt is ready. Alright, so here is also a picture of the newspaper from when this war is over, which I'm going to show you now, and then we're going to move on to the announcements.